A millionaire CEO finds a little boy at his own wife's grave, only to freeze at what he says. Imagine standing in the crisp autumn air, surrounded by golden leaves and cold stone tombstones. You're a man who has spent years building an empire, controlling every aspect of your life with precision. But today, none of that matters. Today, you're just another grieving soul at your late wife's grave, trying to keep her memory alive. That's where our story begins, with Alexander Carter, a billionaire CEO whose world is about to be turned upside down. As he kneels beside his wife Evelyn's resting place, lost in thought, something catches his eye. A little boy sitting quietly near the headstone. His heart skips a beat as curiosity turns into shock when the child looks up and says words that freeze Alexander to his core. "She was my mom." Alexander isn't just any man. He's someone who thrives on control, logic, and strategy. Yet here he is, face to face with a mystery he can't solve with money or power. The boy, Liam, couldn't be older than 7. Dressed in clothes too thin for the biting New York chill, there's something hauntingly familiar about him. His soft brown eyes, his delicate features. They remind Alexander of Evelyn. It feels impossible, yet undeniable. Could this child truly be connected to the woman he loved more than anything? And if so, why didn't she tell him? These questions swirl in Alexander's mind like a storm, leaving him unmoored and desperate for answers. Liam's presence raises more questions than it answers. Who is he really? Why does he seem so attached to Evelyn's grave? And most importantly, what secrets did Evelyn take to her grave that could change everything Alexander thought he knew about their life together? As Alexander tries to piece together the fragments of this puzzle, we see flashes of the man beneath the polished exterior, the one who grieved deeply for Evelyn, the one who still feels the void she left behind. This encounter forces him to confront emotions he's buried under layers of ambition and success. For the first time in years, he's not thinking about board meetings or mergers. He's thinking about family, loss, and the ties that bind us, even after death. The tone shifts between somber reflection and mounting tension as Alexander decides to dig deeper into Liam's past. He starts making calls, pulling strings, and uncovering truths that make his blood run cold. Every new detail adds another layer of complexity to the situation. Was Evelyn hiding something from him? Did she fear how he'd react? Or was there someone else involved? Someone dangerous? Meanwhile, Liam watches all of this unfold with wide, cautious eyes. He's no ordinary child. He's been through abandonment, neglect, and uncertainty far beyond his years. Yet there's a quiet resilience in him, a spark of hope that makes Alexander realize this isn't just about solving a mystery. It's about protecting a child who's already lost too much. As the story unfolds, we begin to understand the depth of Evelyn's sacrifices and the choices she made out of love. She wasn't just a devoted wife. She was also a mother who gave up everything to give her son a chance at a better life. Her decision to keep Liam away from Alexander, and perhaps from someone else entirely, becomes clearer but no less painful. We learn about her struggles, her fears, and the impossible position she found herself in. Through flashbacks and subtle hints, Evelyn emerges as a central figure whose absence looms large over the narrative, driving both Alexander and Liam toward a shared journey of healing and discovery. But just as Alexander starts to wrap his head around the situation, a bombshell drops, one that threatens to shatter the fragile stability they've begun to build. A name surfaces during the investigation, sending chills down Alexander's spine. Mark Donovan. If you know anything about corporate battles, you've heard of him. Ruthless, calculating, and always 10 steps ahead. Mark is everything Alexander despises in a rival, but now he's more than just a business adversary. He might also be Liam's biological father. The revelation hits like a freight train, forcing Alexander to grapple with a question he never expected to face. What happens when the person who could claim Liam as their own is someone he wouldn't trust with anything, let alone a child? The stakes rise dramatically as Alexander realizes he's not just fighting for Liam's future. He's fighting against forces far greater than himself. Mark's involvement introduces a whole new level of danger and unpredictability. Will he want to step into Liam's life now that he knows about him? And if he does, will Liam accept him? These are questions neither Alexander nor Liam are ready to answer. But time is running out. Mark is already moving pieces into place, determined to meet the son he never knew existed. Meanwhile, Liam wrestles with conflicting emotions: anger at being abandoned, fear of rejection, and a flicker of curiosity about the man who shares half his DNA. By the end of this introduction, the tension is almost unbearable. Alexander stands on the edge of a precipice, knowing that whatever choice he makes will have lasting consequences. Does he protect Liam from Mark, shielding him from potential harm? Or does he honor Liam's right to know the truth, even if it means risking everything they've built together? As the camera pans out, showing Alexander pacing anxiously in his penthouse while Liam sits quietly nearby, we're left hanging on a single, unresolved moment: the arrival of Mark's message. An envelope rests on the table, sealed and ominous, containing words that could either mend wounds or tear them open wider. What lies inside will set the stage for the next chapter of this gripping tale. But until then, viewers are left wondering what choice Liam will make, and whether Alexander can shield him from the storm that's brewing just beyond the horizon. The days following Liam's meeting with Mark Donovan felt like walking on a tightrope for Alexander. Every moment was charged with uncertainty. Every decision weighed down by consequences that could ripple through their lives forever. Liam had returned from the restaurant quieter than usual, retreating into himself as he processed what had happened. The envelope Mark gave him remained untouched on his nightstand, its presence looming large in the silence of the penthouse. Alexander watched the boy carefully, trying to gauge his emotions, but unsure how to bridge the gap between them. He wasn't just dealing with a child anymore. He was navigating uncharted territory where trust, fear, and identity collided. Meanwhile, Alexander's mind raced with questions about Evelyn. How much had she known? Had she truly believed keeping Liam away from Mark was the right choice? Or had she been driven by desperation and fear? The more he thought about it, the more he realized how little he understood about the woman he'd loved so deeply. Their marriage had been built on mutual respect and affection, but there were cracks beneath the surface, things they never fully addressed. Late nights at work, missed anniversaries, whispered arguments about priorities. It all seemed insignificant, now compared to the secret she had carried to her grave. For the first time, Alexander allowed himself to wonder if their relationship had been as solid as he'd always assumed. Liam's behavior began to shift subtly over the next few weeks. He spent hours alone in his room, reading books Rebecca had bought him or staring out the window at the sprawling city below. Sometimes, Alexander would catch him tracing the edge of the envelope Mark had given him, as if debating whether to open it. Other times, Liam would ask unexpected questions during dinner. Questions about Alexander's own childhood, his parents, his dreams before wealth and power consumed his life. It was as if the boy was searching for something, though neither of them could articulate what it was. One evening, while they sat together, watching the sunset paint the skyline in hues of orange and pink, Liam finally spoke up. "Do you think people can change?" His voice was soft, almost hesitant, as if he feared the answer. Alexander turned to him, surprised by the depth of the question. "I think people want to change," he said, after a pause. "But actually, doing it, that's harder." Liam nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Like my dad. Do you think he really wants to know me? Or is he just, I don't know, curious?" Alexander hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Your father has a lot to prove, not just to you, but to himself. Whether he means it or not, only time will tell." Liam didn't respond immediately, but the tension in his small frame eased slightly, as if hearing someone else acknowledge his doubts brought him some measure of relief. Still, the question lingered in the air, unanswered and unresolved. As Liam grappled with his feelings about Mark, Alexander found himself increasingly distracted by the business world he had tried to leave behind. News of Mark's inquiry had spread quickly among his inner circle, and whispers of scandal began to circulate. Competitors smelled blood in the water, eager to exploit any weakness in Alexander's empire. Board meetings became tense affairs, with shareholders questioning his judgment and advisors urging him to distance himself from the situation entirely. "This isn't just your problem anymore," Daniel warned one afternoon in Alexander's office. "If Mark decides to use this against you, it won't just affect Liam. It'll tear everything apart." But Alexander refused to back down. For years, he had prided himself on being untouchable, a man who thrived under pressure and emerged victorious no matter the odds. Yet now, faced with the possibility of losing Liam, he realized how hollow those victories felt without someone to share them with. He couldn't let Mark take the boy away, not because of pride or possession, but because Liam deserved stability. He deserved a chance to grow up knowing he mattered. Even if the world around him was falling apart, the turning point came when Mark made his next move. A formal letter arrived at Alexander's office, delivered by a courier with impeccable timing. Inside was a proposal: joint custody of Liam, framed as a way to give the boy access to both worlds. On paper, it sounded reasonable, balanced even, but Alexander knew better. Mark wasn't offering compromise. He was asserting control, planting seeds of doubt that would force Alexander to either fight back or concede defeat. The audacity of it enraged him, but beneath the anger was a gnawing sense of fear. What if Mark succeeded? What if Liam chose him? That night, Alexander called an emergency meeting with Daniel and Rebecca. They gathered in his study, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on all of them. "We need leverage," Daniel said bluntly. "Something to show Mark that pushing this too far won't end well for him." Rebecca nodded, adding, "And we need to protect Liam. Whatever happens, he can't feel like he's caught in the middle." Alexander listened silently, his mind racing. He hated the idea of using Liam as a pawn, but he also knew they couldn't afford to be passive. This wasn't just a personal battle, it was war. While Alexander strategized, Liam continued to navigate his own internal struggle. One day, he finally opened the envelope Mark had given him. Inside was a handwritten letter, filled with raw emotion and regret. Mark admitted his mistakes, acknowledged the pain he had caused, and expressed a genuine desire to make amends. As Liam read, tears welled up in his eyes, not out of sadness, but out of confusion. Part of him wanted to believe the words, to give his father a chance to prove himself. But another part, the part shaped by years of abandonment and neglect, screamed that trusting anyone came with risks he wasn't sure he was ready to take. The climax approached rapidly, spurred on by Mark's growing impatience. When Alexander rejected the custody proposal outright, Mark retaliated by filing a lawsuit, claiming that Alexander had illegally withheld information about Liam's paternity. The media frenzy that followed was chaotic and relentless, painting Alexander as a manipulative billionaire clinging to a child who didn't belong to him. Protesters gathered outside his building, holding signs that read, "Let Liam decide," and "Family over fortune." Through it all, Liam remained eerily calm, as if the storm raging around him couldn't touch the quiet resolve forming within. Finally, the day of the court hearing arrived. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as reporters and spectators packed the benches. Alexander sat beside Liam, his hand resting protectively on the boy's shoulder. Across the aisle, Mark looked every bit the confident titan of industry, flanked by a team of high-powered lawyers. As the judge called the session to order, the air grew thick with tension. This was it, the moment that would determine Liam's future and redefine the fragile bonds holding them all together. When the judge asked Liam directly what he wanted, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to the boy, who stood slowly, his small frame dwarfed by the towering figures around him. For a moment, he hesitated, glancing between Alexander and Mark. Then, with a steadiness that belied his age, he spoke. "I want to decide for myself," he said firmly. "Not because of what anyone else wants, but because it's my life." The statement hung in the air, electrifying and profound. In that instant, the battle lines blurred, and the true heart of the conflict came into focus. It wasn't about money, power, or even family. It was about giving a child the freedom to choose his own path. And as the judge nodded, signaling the beginning of deliberations, everyone in the room knew that whatever happened next, Liam's voice had changed everything. As the days turned into weeks, Liam found himself caught in a tug-of-war between two worlds. On one side was Alexander, who had become more than just a guardian. He was someone Liam trusted, someone who stayed when others wouldn't. On the other side was Mark Donovan, whose presence loomed large, despite his cautious attempts to build a relationship. The envelope Mark had given him sat unopened on Liam's nightstand, a constant reminder of the choice he had yet to fully make. Meanwhile, Alexander worked tirelessly behind the scenes, ensuring that Liam's life remained stable. He hired tutors, enrolled Liam in extracurricular activities, and even began attending parent-teacher meetings, things he never imagined himself doing. But for all his efforts, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that this fragile balance wouldn't last forever. The tension reached its peak when Mark filed a lawsuit, claiming partial custody of Liam. The news hit like a thunderclap, shattering the uneasy peace they had built. Reporters swarmed outside Alexander's penthouse, cameras flashing as headlines screamed about the billionaire battle over a child. For Liam, it felt like the ground beneath him was crumbling. He retreated into himself again, spending hours staring out the window or flipping through the pages of books without really reading them. Alexander noticed the change immediately, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't reach the boy. It wasn't until Rebecca gently suggested letting Liam express his feelings that Alexander realized what was missing. He hadn't asked Liam what he wanted. One evening, after another grueling day of legal strategizing with Daniel, Alexander sat down beside Liam on the couch. "I need you to tell me something," he said softly. Liam glanced up, his expression guarded. "What?" he asked. Alexander hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "This isn't just about me or Mark. It's about you. What do you want?" because whatever you decide, I'll stand by it." The room fell silent, except for the distant hum of the city outside. Liam looked down at his hands, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can trust him." Alexander nodded, understanding the weight of Liam's words. "That's okay," he said. "You don't have to figure it out right now. But remember this, you're not alone in this. No matter what happens, I'm here." Something shifted in Liam's eyes then, a flicker of hope breaking through the doubt. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to face the world on his own anymore. The courtroom was packed on the day of the hearing, the air thick with anticipation. Lawyers from both sides argued, passionately, their voices echoing off the walls. Mark's team painted him as a reformed man, someone who deserved a second chance to be a father. Alexander's lawyers countered by emphasizing stability, pointing out that Liam had thrived under his care. Through it all, Liam sat quietly between them, his small frame dwarfed by the towering figures around him. When the judge finally called for Liam to speak, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to the boy, who stood slowly, his legs trembling slightly. I think I should get to choose," Liam began, his voice steady, despite the nerves coursing through him. "Both of you are part of my life now, but I don't want to leave either of you behind." He paused, glancing at Alexander and then at Mark. "I want to keep living with Alexander because he's been there for me when no one else was. But I also want to know my dad, to see if we can figure things out together." The simplicity of his statement carried profound weight, cutting through the layers of complexity that had defined the case. The judge nodded thoughtfully before delivering her ruling. Joint custody, with Liam primarily residing with Alexander, while allowing scheduled visits with Mark. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was one that acknowledged Liam's wishes and prioritized his well-being above all else. As the gavel came down, Alexander felt a wave of relief wash over him. They had won, not in the way he had envisioned, but in a way that mattered most. In the months that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. Liam continued to thrive under Alexander's care, growing more confident with each passing day. His bond with Mark deepened gradually, though it remained cautious and measured. Mark, for his part, seemed genuinely committed to being present in Liam's life, attending school events and taking an interest in his hobbies. Slowly but surely, Liam began to see that having two fathers didn't mean losing either of them. It meant gaining something he had longed for his entire life: family. For Alexander, the experience changed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He had entered this journey as a man defined by control and logic, but he emerged as someone who understood the value of vulnerability and connection. He often found himself thinking about Evelyn, wondering what she would think of everything that had transpired. In those moments, he took comfort in knowing that she had loved Liam enough to give him a chance at happiness, and that, in her absence, he had done the same. As the sun set over New York City one crisp autumn evening, Alexander and Liam stood together on the balcony of the penthouse, watching the skyline light up with golden hues. "Do you think Mom would be proud of us?" Liam asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Alexander smiled, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I think she'd be proud of you," he replied. "And I know she'd be happy to see how far you've come." Liam nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. For the first time in his life, he felt truly seen, truly loved. And as the city stretched endlessly before them, bathed in the warm glow of twilight, it was clear that their story was only beginning.